Hey, good evening, everyone. Welcome. So good to see you, and thank you for coming to the Curators in Conversation that I've been leading with the curatorial team here at the Portland Art Museum. I'm Brian Fariso, the director and chief curator of the museum, and this has been a really good process for me to learn not only more about our curators, but their vision, and I hope I'm able to share that with you all. Tonight we have Julia Dolan. Dr. Dolan will talk about the photography collection and her vision and some of the work she's done. But before we do that, I want to talk about a few things that you've probably noticed as you've walked in. There are no more cars here, and we are installing an exhibition of Japanese art, which we're just really excited about. And I know Mary Beth Grable, Dr. Grable's here, and it's called Poetic Imagination in Japanese Art, Selections from the Collection of Mary and Cheney Coles. Major collectors that we're just thrilled to partner with. Mary Beth has put together a wonderful exhibition thanks to Jeannie Kenmotso, who is the Associate Curator of Asian Art or Japanese Art here, as well as Sangha Kim. And I just encourage you to please come back when that opens up next week. So we're really excited about that. And then upstairs is Modern American Realism. You know, we have a very nice collection of paintings going back to our origins, when the artists Alden Weir, Child Hassam, among others, came out to Oregon. And this exhibition from the Smithsonian looks at that moment, sort of 1930s all the way up to the 60s, where artists were sort of responding against abstraction. And we have important works by Edward Hopper and Paul Cadmus and Jacob Lawrence in that exhibition. And I'm very grateful to the Smithsonian in Washington, which has taken these major works off their walls to share them with us. So that opens on the 20th of October. And then another important project, which Julie and I are going to talk a little bit more about, is a collaboration we have with the Oregon Jewish Museum, and it's an exhibition called Memory Unearthed, the Lotz Ghetto Photographs of Heinrich Ross. And it's a very powerful show that will be up in the photography galleries. And again, we'll talk more about that. And that opens up October 27th. So we have just an ongoing number of exhibitions coming forward over the next month, and I think they will be of great interest to many of you. And tonight I'm especially excited to talk about this because I think many of you in this room understand the importance and the history of our photography collection. And the founders of this museum in 1892 laid the groundwork for what we know is today a collection of almost 9,000 photographs. But going back, there are those images. I should have been clicking. Poetic Imagination. There's that Hopper. There we go. And then there's the Lotz Ghetto. But that's where I want to be. I want to be here because, again, I think what's so important about the conversation tonight is the history of the photography collection here at the museum and the museum's role and partnership with the Portland Society of Photographic Art. And again, that was started back in 1905. So we have a phenomenal history, and it's a tall order for this museum to continue that history and to build upon it, but really a tall order for Julia, and she's done a superb job in making this come to life. The collection, as I mentioned, is 9,000 photographs, and it has dedicated space in the Jubitz Center, and we owe a number of people and the foresight of several donors, Jim and Susan Winkler, Mary Bauman, and the Murray, Barbie, and Langton families for making that all possible during the last expansion in 2005. But what is another very significant part of this story is the Photography Council of the Portland Art Museum. And great partners with the museum and our curators, and really has helped us bring this forward in a meaningful way. And I know, I don't know if Ray Bittigan is here. Is Ray? There you are. Ray, thanks for your leadership, and thanks to all the council members for their support of Julia and the museum. So thank you very much. Now, without further ado, I want to introduce Julia. She's the minor white curator of photography, and as I mentioned, she oversees research, documentation, and exhibition of the museum's permanent collection of nearly 9,000 photographs. Since 2010, when she was appointed, she has curated or co-curated more than 40 exhibitions. Julia and I were talking about that today, which is really quite phenomenal. And those include, many of you will remember, contemporary native photographers and the Edward Curtis legacy, Zig Jackson, Wendy Red Star, and Will Wilson, and that was in 2016. Subject-object modernist photography from the Bluff Collection in 2015. She partnered with me to present Richard Mosse, the Enclave, in 2014, and Blue Sky, the Oregon Center for Photographic Arts at 40, which was an important moment for us in 2014. She has published numerous articles and essays and publications and is currently co-curating with our curator, Sarah Krajewski, a major mid-career retrospective of contemporary artist Hank Willis Thomas, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Julia's degree is a BFA in photography from the Maryland Institute of College of Art, an MA in the history of art from Pennsylvania State University, and a Ph.D. in art history from Boston University. She has worked with photography collections around the country, including the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Addison Gallery of American Art, and the Fogg Art Museum at Harvard, and has been with us, as I mentioned, since 2010. And I'm so excited to have Julia Dolan up here. So Julia, welcome.
Thanks.
So there we go. What a way to start. And I asked the curators to pull back the curtain a little bit on their lives, and Julia has done that. And Charles and I were commenting, we just love the shoes. Perfect.
I know. I still wear patent leather shoes
Yeah.
and tights. Yeah.
So I think this is an interesting photograph, not only because it's a photograph, but it's Julia. But Julia was sort of talking to me about memory and her childhood and how photographs all enter our lives in different ways. And do we always remember those childhood photographs? And do you remember this one?
I don't remember this one at all, but I remember a memory that surrounds this photograph that was made at this time. That is my first memory of photography, if that makes sense. I'll unpack it. This, as far as I am aware, even though I don't remember this at all, I'm at my great-grandmother Camilla's house, and near the kitchen on the wall, and I think I was about 5 years old here, was a photograph, late 19th, maybe early 20th century photograph of most likely my great-grandfather Camilla, who was no longer alive when this picture was taken. So he was a young man right around the turn of the century, and it was terrifying. It absolutely terrified me, and I was a young Catholic girl in Sunday school, and I thought he was the devil, which is awful. Sorry, but it was so scary because if you think about Victorian era photography and sepia tone images, people didn't show their teeth in photographs like they do now, and I was terrified of that image, and that links to this photograph to me because it's within that space and that time, and that's my first memory of photography and really the power that a photograph can have.
And then I think Julia looking for photographs in the cabinet on the left, and I think some of her projects when she was younger making photographs. So I think she's a maker, and I think that's an important theme to remember about her curation and her thinking about photographs. So you grew up in Buffalo on the left there, 1973, and then what brought you to Montreal in 1980?
My father was transferred for work, so we moved to Montreal in 78, so we lived there until 86. And I went to public schools for part of the time that I was in Montreal, and I bring out this photograph because this was right around the time when I started engaging with 8mm film, and we had the resources around 1980 in Montreal in a public school where I could engage with art forms that were maybe a little bit different. So we would do these, I think we called them scratch films, and I would scratch through the emulsion on the film, and I would make these little animated films. And then I started doing stop action film as well. And then within about 2 years, I was making 35 millimeter black and white negatives and in the darkroom. So by about 10.
Yeah, and it's a great photograph too, and I think I can reflect on my own childhood, or many of us, public school education, art classes, inspire us for life. In this situation, a curator who shares their talents with us inspires us further, so very important. Support that Art Access Fund, the city of Portland. Mm-hmm. And what's really interesting about Julia's experience is she was an artist, and here she is in 1993, and she was positioning the slide projector. Is that what that is?
Yeah, so there are 2 slide projectors. You are not seeing my art. I purposely am not showing you any of my work. There's a reason why I'm not an active artist anymore. I loved the Maryland Institute. I'm so glad. I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to be a photographer. I loved photography. I went through 4 years of school. I got my degree. I did fine. I wasn't what I needed to be an active artist working in that way. And it took a little while to figure out what I wanted to do. 6 years. I worked in the outside world for about 6 years. But so what you see here, you see somebody else's work behind me, but this is my senior thesis, and I was using appropriated images, family images, oddly enough, talking about family pictures from around the turn of the 20th century. And so this is 93, this is before digital, and so I'm turning on 2 slide projectors and I projected text over some of the gridded images. So that's what you see there. So that was kind of the end of one part of my career, and then the end of my academic career you see on the right-hand side. That's one of the happiest moments in my life, which I wasn't expecting, actually. I almost didn't go to my Ph.D. graduation because I was no longer living in Boston. I was working at Philadelphia. It's really hard to get a hotel room that weekend in Boston because all the schools graduate at the same time. I told my parents not to come, and I did it at the last minute, and I was crying in the audience when it finally became very clear like how much work we had all together put in to our research and our dedication. What I also love about this, and you can't quite see it here, but I'm surrounded by women. So my advisor, Kim Sichel, is right behind me, and then the dean is in front of me, and then there's another woman. And I think about all of these women like attaining as much as we can in the educational system and then being there together and celebrating it. It was really much more powerful than I ever thought.
Yeah, it's a great picture because I think, what is a PhD? How long did that take to get? Just years upon years upon years.
And it's very lonely. I'm thinking a lot about collaboration now because I collaborate so much more. In certain PhD tracks, you are not encouraged to collaborate. You're supposed to be the originator of the idea, and you work alone for years to get to the final hurdle of writing the dissertation and defending it, and you defend alone. You write alone and you defend alone and you research alone, and you have people around you supporting you, but it's one of the loneliest things you can do, and you battle yourself the entire time. It's hard. Yeah.
Well, congratulations, it's a great accomplishment, and Lee Miller was of influence to you, and I think you did some of your work at Penn State, mm-hmm. with Lee. Talk a little bit about how her photography and her experiences influenced some of your thinking about curation and the history of photography.
I wrote my master's thesis on Lee Miller's work for Vogue magazine. The photograph that you see at the top left was taken by Man Ray of Lee Miller. They were lovers for a brief period of time, and she was, I hate this word, but I'm going to use it, she was one of his muses. She was a model for Vogue. She actually started out appearing in the pages of Vogue and was photographed by many famous photographers. And then learned photography from Man Ray and others in Paris and became this really interesting surrealist photographer. And then fascinatingly, in the mid-1940s, she applies to be a war correspondent. She's making photographs for Vogue magazine, so she's no longer in front of the camera for Vogue, she's behind it. She's actually stuck in London. She's an American, but she won't leave because she's in a relationship with a British man. Even though they call her back to the United States, she stays. And then she gets accredited to be a war correspondent with US troops. And she is present and photographing when the US troops are liberating concentration camps. And the work that she produces during that time it still shocks me today. Vogue magazine published it. And they published it in British Vogue and they published it in American Vogue. French Vogue wasn't being published because they were occupied by the Nazis. So my thesis work dealt with the photographs that were shown, and then the photographic choices were different between England and the United States. And the images that you see in American Vogue are much more violent and graphic than the images that you see in British Vogue. And my argument is because the readers of British Vogue, they had been through the Blitz. They had to live through the war in a way that US women, although they were losing their husbands and their brothers and their fathers, potentially, they weren't seeing the action. So there was something about the visceral nature of these photographs that was very important for an American audience. And it's just something you never think about when you think about fashion magazines dealing with the most difficult of difficult subjects.
Yeah, it's an interesting reveal. And then your PhD was on Louis Hine, documenting the construction and the industrialization and the city building that was happening. And he did a lot of photographs, as you mentioned, to help sort of promote the advancement of, or the sales of these buildings and the spaces and the development of cities. And that's what we can see here. I love the photograph on the left where you talked to me earlier about what that image was trying to do.
So my argument, Louis Hine, many of you know the work that he did for Ellis Island when he was a teacher at the Ethical Culture School in Manhattan. He was a very firm believer in the power and ability of humanity to do good. And he was hired in 1930 to photograph the Empire State Building as the steel builders worked on it. So very early on in the Depression. And so he travels up floor by floor with the construction workers, and there are over 1,000 negatives in the grouping. Again, what I am interested in terms of these photographs, like with Vogue magazine, is not the way that they would appear in a museum, although I love seeing them in museums now because they are stunning works of machine age art and photography, but how would somebody reading a newspaper or a magazine see these, and what were the messages behind them? So the images that you see here are all photographs by Hine from this body of work that he was hired to make by Empire State Incorporated. And in the newspaper, in a magazine, and then in another magazine advertisement. So these photographs are advertisements, they're public relations, they're editorial. And they were, about 75 as a group were selected, and they were transmitted throughout the world. So there were newspapers in Australia that were publishing them because everybody knew that this was going to be the tallest building in the world. And part of my argument in the dissertation is that the photographs that are selected, and you see this here, especially on the two on the left, on the left and the center, there are a lot of riskier photographs that he made where there's no barrier between you, the person looking at the photograph, and falling 1,000 feet over. But the photographs that were selected for publication all have some type of barrier that you as the viewer can stand on and look out, from this beautiful perch onto the city. So my argument is that these photographs were specifically chosen to teach people the behavior of going to a viewing platform, because inherent in this building was the 86th and the 102nd floor. And because the building opened in 1931, depths of the Depression, it was a speculative building. It wasn't like the Chrysler building where Chrysler Corporation took over the entire building. They had to rent every office space in the Empire State Building one by one, and it was only 25% full at the time that it opened in 1931. So they had to promote tourism. So in the Depression, the first year that the building was open, the observation galleries made over $1 million because tourists were coming to see what it would be like to be up so high.
And then Louis Hine also was very much about the people that you've talked about with me, the craftsmen making these modern structures. So not only was it steel, but it was craftsmanship that made them come to life.
Laborers, so steel, brickwork, woodwork, piping, electricity, everything. So this is another example. I'm just showing you too, what I love about the image on the left, and I talked about this at length in the dissertation, is that you see it's so modern and so stunning and beautiful, and it's scary, and it's atmospheric in the background, but we've got these really, these steel beams that are so precise and perfect, and they're coming from Pittsburgh, and they're still practically hot as they come off the trucks. There were, at the height, there were 5,000 workers a day on this building. It was put up in 14 months. 14 months, I think that's right. I submitted my dissertation 10 years ago this month, so my numbers might be a little off. But what I love about this image is that the steel components here have not connected yet. They're about to, but in the photograph, it's the human beings who are physically connecting. So visually, they're connecting us, and they're literally connecting the steel together. So it's the human beings who have to do this, even though we're in the machine age. And so what you see on the right-hand side is from a magazine called Empire Statements that was moved out into New York and the surrounding region, trying to get businesses to rent in this space. So it pushes, number one, the state-of-the-art nature of this tallest building in the world, but it also pushes the idea of the individual's hand crafting it. So here you see portraits. And then if you go to the Empire State Building, which hopefully all of you might be able to do, you don't even have to go upstairs, just go into the lobby, you will see that there is a plaque with honored craftsmen and their names on that plaque in the lobby. So there is this real understanding of the work that goes behind making something that's state-of-the-art.
And we're very fortunate, a lot of foundations, or some foundations, have supported pre-docs, postdocs, doctorate fellows. And when I met Julia, she was a fellow at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, one of the great museums in the country, if not the world, but also an important body of photographs. And so she was working at a location and supported and really launching her career with exhibitions such as this, Spectacle, Photographs from the Collection. Was this one of the first projects you were working on after when you got there?
So I was pre-doctoral. I was finishing up my dissertation the first year I got there in 2007, and I defended in 2008. And from my dissertation, I started thinking about Philadelphia's collection and the idea of what a spectacle is and what a spectator is. So that drew directly from this idea of being high up on a building and being a spectator and looking down. So you've got the spectator, and then you have the city below as the spectacle. And then if you're standing on the ground looking up at the Empire State Building, it's a spectacle there in it of its, on its own. So I expanded this idea of what a spectacle is, and because that was such an important and to me very interesting part of my dissertation. And it was wonderful to pull from 19th century photographs, 20th, 21st. And such a diverse collection. There are about 30,000 photographs in their collection.
So I didn't prep you for this question. So at this time, were you, when the Portland opportunity came up, what were you thinking, and why Portland?
Because the job was open, was one. It was scary. It's hard. It's so hard. It's wonderful to have fellowships, but I had been on a fellowship train, really. So I had left Boston in 2006. I had a 6-month fellowship at the Smithsonian. I was a Sarah Roby fellow, actually, at the Smithsonian, and it's a Sarah Roby collection that you'll be seeing in a couple of weeks. So a wonderful individual has donated so much, not only to museums so that people can see art, but also to scholars who are working. So I was there for 6 months. I was then at the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum Research Center for 5 months. I went out with 2 suitcases and my laptop to work on my dissertation. And then I moved to Philadelphia for 3 years. So you're constantly wondering, how long you'll be in a place, and you know you have 5 months or 6 months or a year. Philadelphia, fortunately, was 3 years, but 2 years in, I was starting to get nervous because I knew I only had a year left, and it was exactly 2 years in that the position opened up. And I had never been to Portland before. I'd never been to Oregon. I'd only been to California, but it seemed like a great opportunity. I had a friend in the department who had gone to Oregon College of Art and Craft and loved it and said it was just such a wonderful city, so I applied.
Well, I think part of that history, we all have to recognize the great work that Terry Totemeyer did in our community, not only as a photographer, but also as a curator here for a number of years. And sadly, Terry passed away right at the end of Wild Beauty, the photographs from the Columbia Gorge. Many of you may remember that. We were able to bring in Julia, which was really exciting. But another very important aspect to that history, which I want to comment on, is we had an anonymous donor endow that position. And we named it in honor of Minor White, the great photographer who has roots here, but has national significance. And I think what's so important and to emphasize to this community is that this museum will continue to have great curators, and important work will be done with those endowments. And Julie, I think it's a testament to you coming as well to inspire the donation and then to help us move this forward. So just as a side note, we have 2 curator positions not endowed. So if you're thinking about it, let me know. Native American and graphic arts. I'm going to keep pushing on that.
It's so meaningful.
Yeah.
It is so meaningful.
Yeah.
It really is.
And you can be anonymous too. So.
Yes, you can.
A really important project for us was the retrospective of Carrie Mae Weems. Carrie grew up here in Portland, left and became a national and internationally significant artist. And this was an exhibition organized by the Frist Center in Nashville, came here to Portland, and then went to the Guggenheim in New York. And reflect a little bit on this show for us.
This was really special for me because I specifically remember Carrie's work from when I was a photography student at the Maryland Institute. Very distinctly remember her work. And to have that Portland connection was incredible. For me to see it all in one place at one time and be able to, use it as a touchstone all the way back from my undergrad work was great. This was the first time I had worked on both floors of our special exhibition space, so I learned so much from that. And we had a wonderful partner in Katie Delmay, who is the curator of the exhibition at the Frist. And it was great to be able to bring Carrie back to the community, and her family came to the opening. It was such a celebration, and it was just a beautiful, beautiful show. I can't claim much of anything in terms of its beauty. The only thing I did was really place it in the space. The space is here, but that's really exciting for a newer curator, but intense to be working with 9,000 square feet of space. And then it's also what I think is so important is to not be too myopic about the two-dimensional print that's in a frame, in a mat, on a wall, but also think about video. And in terms of Carrie, she also had, these screens, these photographic kind of scrims and screens that you walk through, and multiple videos, not just one. So how can photography exist with other art forms, other media, or how can it be experienced differently, not just always on the wall?
And a great memory is on Super Bowl Sunday, Carrie spoke, and we had
right.
800 people come to that lecture, which was really exciting. Also, I want to draw your attention outside, in between the two buildings, we're partnering with a national organization called Four Freedoms, and that was inspired by Hank Willis Thomas, again, an artist which we will be talking about in a bit, but he worked with his friends and colleagues to develop the large banner artworks that you see on our campus in between the buildings, and the image you see right up front is by Carrie Mae Weems, and that was her contribution to that initiative. So we continue our relationship with her, and she's been a really great partner of ours.
Yeah, I heard you talk to her a couple weeks ago.
I did talk to her, and she's very fond of our museum.
She's very fond of Brian.
Yeah.
She is. It's very sweet. Sweet.
She was good. Yeah. She's a wonderful woman. She says, "Say hi to your wife." But the other important part was our partnership with Blue Sky. Inspired by Christopher Rauschenberg and several others. I know Terry was involved, the founding, and I'm missing one individual's name.
So there were 5 altogether: Robert
Yes.
DeFranco, Terry, Chris Rauschenberg, Anne Hughes, and Craig
That's it.
Hickman.
Craig Hickman. I'm sorry, I should have had that. But what I think is so important about this is we are an institution about bringing the world to Oregon and then Oregon to the world. And I think it's very important for this museum to partner with organizations within our community which are doing important work, such as Blue Sky. This was a major publication, and you did it brilliantly, Julia, with your installation. You did a major catalog. And really brought it together. And it's a really hard topic because it spans decades of work.
750 exhibitions by 650 photographers in 40 years. So that's what I was tasked with starting with. So here you go. It was, so you start that was a really interesting problem, and I love looking back on it to see it manifested through the catalog and then on the walls was really, it was fabulous. And I love that, the lower left image that you see, which is the salon hang. That was the main way I could express 750 shows, 650 artists along this 40 some odd foot wall. It ended up working out really well. It's important for us to think about and acknowledge what Blue Sky has done for the community here and what they brought to this community. I mean, super early on, Jim Goldberg, Nan Golden, Robert Frank. It was just such a wonderful place and still is an incredible, incredible place now. And for a number of years, there was a very helpful program to us where we had some donors who would purchase photographs from different Blue Sky exhibitions. And many of the exhibitors there are newer, younger photographers, so it puts some money in their pockets and then also moves them into a museum collection, which is also incredibly helpful for younger artists. So we're very grateful to them and what they do here in Portland.
Very gratifying project for our community. And another one that I think really distinguished the museum, and I think Julia's work and her partnership with Dina Dart, our curator of Native American art at the time, was the Edward Curtis Show and the Contemporary Native Photographers. Yeah. And talk a little bit about your thesis here and what you were trying to accomplish with this exhibition that gained a lot of critical attention.
It did. And I'm looking at these photographs, and in the photographs it seems more chaotic than it was. I found it to be, there was so much work in that show too. I'm looking at all these shows thinking, wow, there are a lot of images. But we make it work, and I found this to be such an enriching and beautiful show. And this is one of the places where I found that more voices rather than a single curatorial voice is really the way to move in the future, because there's no way I could have done this exhibition without Dina and her expertise and her knowledge and her background. And I have a certain understanding of Native American photography, which is mostly, at least when Edward Curtis was working, was photographs of Native Americans, right? So that's a very different thing. So it was important to us to make sure that contemporary artists who are Native American, who are using photography as a vehicle, were included in this conversation. It can't just be about Edward Curtis. And to see his work bounce off of these incredibly dynamic, important photographers and artists working with photography was very, very special and deeply thoughtful. And it was really amazing to see, because we had feedback stations in the exhibition, and it got a little complicated sometimes, and it brought up issues. We went ahead and opened those channels to discuss these problems that come with photographing people who aren't like us. And I say us as someone of Western European heritage. I'm a white person, and many of us go out and photograph people who aren't white, and that's a problem, and has been a problem for a long time. And so we started to unpack that. Some people loved it, and some people hated it. They were really bothered by the fact that we would integrate work that wasn't just Curtis. People really wanted, I think, to keep that idea of Curtis very pure and together and good, and complicating it was difficult for some people. And I understand that, but I was a little sorry that some people weren't able to engage with these other artists who are working to claim and reclaim who they are and who their people are, and what that means and how they can express that identity.
So this was an important healing project for us too. We, as you know, have a number of works by Curtis that he produced in the portfolio, but a lot of the subjects have descendants which live in the area today. So by talking about the images and the portraits of the individuals, as family members, and connecting with those family members, it created an entirely new dynamic and conversation within the organization, and I think within our community, and I think it healed a lot. It was very, very important and very powerful. We had a program with the descendants speaking about their grandmother, their great aunt, and I thought that was very important.
And adding names back in, definitely. But yeah, it was, and not to take away from Curtis at all, we have the entire North American Indian. It's very important, and it came through the library beginning in 1907. So in some ways is the basis of our photography collection, even though it came through the library, and we're thrilled to have it.
And another powerful exhibition was representing, and I think it goes back to some of the early photographs we showed of your professional journey and your upbringing of vernacular photographs. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this is a really interesting story. So the album that you see in the case on the left, this is a photography album that came from the estate of Mercedes and Carl Diaz. And some of you will know Mercedes' name. She was the first Black woman to be appointed a circuit court judge in Oregon. And her husband, Carl, was a Tuskegee Airman. And Mercedes was originally from New York, but Carl was a lifelong, almost lifelong, I think, Oregonian. So a really, really important family here in Oregon. And this happens sometimes with vernacular photographs, with our everyday photographs. They become disconnected from us. So this album accidentally was disconnected from the heirs when Carl and Mercedes's estate went to auction. And it just so happens that someone I know who deals with vintage works and antiques had purchased it at the estate sale. I saw it on his Instagram feed, and I said, put it aside, I'm coming over. Because he was posting multiple photographs, and it's really important because you don't, as a historian, often see that many 19th century photographs of African Americans together. And there are multiple reasons for that. One is because it was often difficult for African Americans in the 19th century to be allowed to have their photograph taken in a photo studio. If you were lucky, the photo studio might have, and I'm using the terminology of the time, but Negro hours, right? Most photographers, it was only white people who could have their photographs made, although there certainly were some African-American photographers making photographs. It was hard to have your photograph made. So there's a really important connection between the development of the personal use camera through Kodak and through Polaroid within the African American community, because then individuals could, number one, make photographs of themselves and then have them made in the ways they wanted to. Because another issue we continue to deal with today is the type of photograph that you see of African Americans in the popular press or on television. And it's a very specific, it's a very narrow, and it's a very typically a negative take on African Americans, and that's something we could talk about. We could do an entire semester talking about this work. So to have photographs of African Americans for their personal use, for their personal representation within their families and within their communities, and then some photographs that I added into this exhibition. So photographs that came in through this album, and you see the large photograph that almost looks like a drawing behind the case. That's Molly Foster. That is the woman who brought this album from the Midwest to Portland in the early 20th century. And that she is Mercedes's grandmother. So there's just this incredible family history. I also added, I brought it up to about 2000, so I had a couple other collectors lend or donate photographs of African Americans. So there are many Polaroids from Jun Lee's collection. So it brought it up to the 2000s. So again, these images of African Americans by African Americans for themselves, which is really important. But what I wanted to say, and something that I really appreciated about Brian, there are many things I appreciate about Brian being a director here. I love working here. But there was an issue with this album because I tried to find the heirs to the Diaz family, and it was very difficult for some reason. There were just, the connections were broken, and it was hard to find them. And eventually they found us because they heard about the exhibition that was happening. So about 2 weeks before the exhibition opened, they said, I think you have an album from our family. So it turns out they never meant for it to go to auction, but if you've ever dealt with a family's estate, and a really important estate that has a lot of documents and objects and furniture, some things get lost in the shuffle. So they believed that this was in an unopened box that they didn't notice that was in the garage. And so we had long talks about that, and that's a very personal thing to have in a museum that wasn't expected to be in a museum. So I had a meeting with Brian one morning, and I said, what would you think about us offering the album back to the family? And that's not something we take lightly. It's not something that we normally do. We don't deaccession works that we've brought into the permanent collection. But this is very important. This is their family legacy. And what does it mean for us to have accidentally brought it into our collection? And they thought about it for a while, and then they decided that they had enough photographs on their own, and that this is a way that they could continue their family's legacy for individuals who might want to research it or think about the ways that photographs are very important within within any family, but in particular within families of color. So it was really wonderful that they allowed us to keep the album, but I really appreciate the fact that you were willing to let it go, because not everyone would have said okay to that.
Trust is important, yeah. I remember that, thank you. This was really a gratifying project for me. I had seen this piece at the Venice Biennale in 2015, and I mentioned this because one of the things that's really important for me as the director is I have curators who speak the truth, and they will tell me that's good or that's bad. So I came back and I thought this was good. My senses were this is an important piece. And then I said, Julia, is this for real? I let it sit for about 2 weeks because she had seen it. She said, it's definitely for real. And that meant a lot because I needed that sort of, you know, that support to know, especially someone of deep knowledge in the history of photography. And what's so important about this project was the intersection between war photography and fine art photography and then video all coming together in one piece, and then throw in sound and installation. It was really a gratifying project. I was thrilled to partner with Julia on this, and I think for those of you who saw it, it was quite memorable.
Yeah, and I remember when Jack Shainman, Richard's gallery in the United States, when they first sent me a bulletin about this, and I remember thinking, what is this? Because this is problematic. Are we aestheticizing the pain of others, which is another thing that photography can do. And it took me a while to think about it and delve more deeply into it, and then seeing the work, you know, talking with Richard and figuring out what Richard was doing and what his intentions were meant a lot. And to have it here was really powerful. And again, it was, you know, some people reacted with, this is amazing, this is really what we need right now, and other people thought, well, this is exploitive of a population that is in dire circumstances. So again, we get a range of thoughts and ideas, but I'm glad we did it. It will be very interesting to see how this work resonates, say, 50 years from now.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm curious if I'm still here.
So one of the things that I'm really proud of is our curators are taking leadership roles throughout the country, speaking, being part of convenings, among other things, and Julia has been instrumental in this network of photography curators, emerging photographers, and photography curators, and they convened here several years ago. Talk about your vision for this, Julia, and what it means for the field.
We, as a group, a number of us who are curators and academics, so professors and nonprofit runners who deal with photography, like Blue Sky and the former New Space Center for Photography, which we miss. We needed a network for one another, especially for those of us who were just out of college or not as often able to go to different conferences and so on as perhaps the senior curators were in our different institutions. And so we decided there were about 5 of us who decided to put together Focus, this group of emerging professionals within the nonprofit world of photography. And the point of it was to start it off, and we started here in Portland in 2012, and eventually to self-select out, because we were no longer emerging, and we wanted to leave room for up-and-coming curators or thinkers in the world of photography. So we started here in 2012. The next iteration is in Los Angeles next week. And so it's been in Toronto, Pittsburgh, New Orleans, Phoenix and Tucson, and I'm happy to let it go and be its own thing with younger, and I shouldn't use the word younger because it's not about age, it's about being newer to the field. But a number of the individuals who are in this photograph just emailed this week and said, I miss Focus. I miss us thinking about photography together. So now they're starting to think about ways that we could be like, I don't know, mid-career focus, or how do we, so it's just really neat to watch your baby kind of go out into the world and then still love and miss that baby, but let it do what it needs to.
Well, it's so good for our museum. The more our curators are connected at this level, it's so good for the program, so good for our audiences, and so I appreciate the work you do there and the other curators traveling around and connecting us with other great thought leaders. Another important project, and you can see the significant piece by Minor White on the right. Part of that project was we partnered with Princeton University on a Minor White symposium, and it happened last year, is that right? Yes, yeah.
April 20th of this year, and it was a full-day symposium with wonderful thinkers, scholars, and archivists, and I show the image on the left just to let you know, it's hard to come to the museum for a full day. You can still watch the sessions on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel, so if you want to learn a little bit more about Minor White's early years, you can do that, and I have the photograph on the right. The original is up on view right now. And that show will be coming down in a week or two, so I encourage you to see these most beautiful WPA photographs, these government-funded photographs that he made. We're going to need to put them back in the vault soon. So, and I just wanted to quickly show this too as a shout out to our online collections. If you ever want to see what we have, about 60% of the photo collection is online. So on the left-hand side, all I did was type in photograph or photograph, something like that. I can't read from here. Photograph. And then it brings up over 6,000 records. We're actually close, like 10,000 photographs now. Wow. I keep bringing them in.
10,000.
Bringing them in.
Great.
But and then on the right-hand side, you see I did a search for Minor White, so you can see all the photographs, and we have some negatives by him as well, so you can see all of those. So thanks to our digital team for getting all of that online.
Well, I'm very gratified to see this. When I arrived in 2006, I think all of our object files were in hard folders and note cards. So getting it digitized has been really very gratifying. Yeah. And this is an important project, and Julia is undertaking this initiative with the Oregon Jewish Museum. A very powerful show. When I think about this exhibition too, Julia, I can't imagine any more powerful reason why a museum needs to exist than this.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is why we exist.
It is why we exist. And some people ask, this question came up a lot with the representing exhibition of vernacular photographs. This is an art museum. Why are you showing vernacular photographs? And I think Memory Unearthed is this perfect example of the power of photography is its ability to record in the face of the most difficult and dire of situations, and to tell a type of truth. Like, that's its power, the having been there. And so that's its art, that's its power.
So briefly,
for us
just
to
tell
do this.
who Heinrich Ross was.
Heinrich Ross was a Polish Jew who was a photojournalist in Lodz, which is a large city in Poland, kind of in the center of Poland. And it was occupied by the Nazis, and part of it was turned into, one part of the city was turned into a ghetto, and in 1940. And between 1940 and end of 1944, over 200,000, mostly Jews, passed through that space. It was a labor camp, and they produced goods for the Nazis, the German army. And Henrik was charged, because he was already a photographer, with making ID photographs and propaganda photographs of the workshops. And he would also hoard film, because he knew he would only have the ability to make photographs for so long. And he then secretly photographed the reality of life in the ghetto. Between 1940 and 1944. You see in the upper right-hand corner, this is him uncovering the box of photographs that he buried. He buried his 6,000 photographs in the ground in about August of 1944, thinking that he was on his way to an execution camp to die, along with everybody else. He was one of 877 survivors. When the Red Army came through in January of 1945, he went back and recovered the negatives, and 3,000 of them survived. And so you will see some in this exhibition, some vintage photographs that also survived, and then photographs that have been printed later, like the image at the bottom, where you can see moisture has damaged some things. But it's not only the dire circumstances that you see in the ghetto, and they were terrible. It's amazing anybody survived whatsoever. But then also how people tried to keep living as best they could. Weddings, birthdays, children. So you will get a bit of back and forth from the exhibition through these images.
This is another project that you've been working on, and I want to go quickly through this,
Yes.
but an exhibition coming that we worked with Prudence Roberts, the widow of Terry Tonemeyer, and some of the images that Terry took. It's up in Tacoma now, coming next year.
Yeah, so it's up in, it opens on October 20th in Tacoma, and so Tacoma Art Museum. So Tacoma has actually put the exhibition together. They've borrowed, I think, 30 of our photographs from the collection. And so you can see it in Tacoma, but then we will be showing it here next year, most likely in the summertime. So you can also see it here. And sometimes it's really fun to see the same exhibition in two different places to see how it differs. But we're thrilled to honor him that way.
And another big initiative that Julie has taken with Sarah Krajewski, which I mentioned, is Hank Willis Thomas, All Things Being Equal, a powerful image here that we see. Talk a little bit about Hank's vision and why this exhibition now for our museum.
Yeah, very briefly, Hank Willis Thomas is a conceptual artist who grows out of the history of photography and the photographic image. Although what I love about him, and it's great as somebody who works in photography, is to see how someone can manipulate the photograph into 3 dimensions, or to take the photograph and use it in many different ways beyond what we normally see. He deals very deeply and smartly, critically, but also openly with the ways in which identity plays out, in particular in advertising, and how images and identity politics and move through the socio-political world, and often, but not always, through the lens of the African-American body, in particular the African-American male body.
And this was a great day because Julia and Sarah were working with Aperture on this major publication, and publications are significant to produce and always a labor of love. And I think this was the day it came in, the first print. Is that right?
Yeah, there are only 2 copies here at the museum. The rest are coming next month. And so this is, Curator for scale, but it's a really large, beautiful book. It was great working with Aperture on this project. And I'm showing you, and the next screen as well has has page spreads, so you can see. We worked also with a group called Original Champions of Design. They're graphic designers in New York City, so it's very, very visually striking. It's not your typical photography book, but it gives you an idea of the punch and the criticality and the beauty of Hank's work. So the next slide will show some individual spreads,
And they'll
too.
be for sale. Yes.
His work's for sale too, but the books are for sale at
books
a
are for
bit of a
sale.
lower price point. But this just gives you an idea of how, in the essay that I wrote, you see on the lower left-hand side, this is a spread from how his photographs resonate today, and how he uses photographs from the past to then make sculptures that you see on the lower right-hand side. And one of his most beautiful, beautiful images and important images is Cotton Bowl that you see on the top left-hand side. Which is, I think, resonant today, if anybody is paying attention to and I'm sure you are, the NFL controversy about taking a knee and so on. So, and this was made long before that controversy came about.
So I always ask, we have one more slide here, then we're going to open it up for questions, but I was asking Julia the other day when we meet, okay, so Hank Willis Thomas is happening next year, what are you going to do next? And she's not committed to this, but we talked about Dorothea Lange and sort of maybe a project in the future of you curating.
Yeah, I feel like if I put it out there, then I have to do it. So, but I've been talking with a few collectors for a while about doing a Dorothea Lange exhibition, and we were gifted 2 vintage prints, these 2 images that you see here by Dorothea Lange, from a member of our Portland community, and it was such an important and wonderful gift. And what better way to honor that, to maybe bring about an exhibition. And I think there's a lot of room still to talk about Dorothea's work, particularly during the Great Depression and afterwards. And a lot of it was socially conscious and socially motivated work, which also, and a lot of it was published in the popular press and newspapers, so that gets right back to the work that I did during graduate school as well. But I would really like to work with a woman who's working at a time when it was a little more difficult to be a photographer and to move about within this space.
Well, Julia, I'm looking forward to this, and I want to also express my gratitude. It's very fulfilling to work with you, and you always provide some great insight into the world of art, and all of our curators have been so thoughtful for this museum, and it's really the great joy for me to come to work every day. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you.
And God, it feels like just yesterday, 2010, when you arrived.
Oh man,
Time
tell me
flies.
about it.
Time
I know.
flies.
I know.
We have some time for some questions, if you have any, for Julia.
Julia, could you give us an idea of how you want to take your career here in the next, let's say, 5 years, what you think would be shown, where the art is going?
I have been thinking about that myself, and I haven't had a lot of room to think about it because of these big projects, which I'm really happy in some ways to not have room, but I get a little nervous too, because I've been averaging anywhere from 3 to 5 exhibitions a year, so I need to keep thinking about those things. What's slowing me down a little bit also is we're doing a lot of internal work at the museum right now in terms of things like equity and inclusion, and thinking about curation in a different way in our audiences and how to be more inclusive and more meaningful to different communities. So that's taking up a lot of my brain space right now. I'd like to get back to the permanent collection a little bit. We've been gifted a wonderful collection of Soviet-era photographs. We have a large population of Soviet bloc diaspora here in Portland and in Vancouver and so on. So there's a lot of potential there, working with local universities and students as well, because we have a lot of Russian studies programs. I want to think about women in terms of photography and their roles and their movements. But I want to keep a balance of historical work and contemporary as well. So I know that I need to cycle back through those. And I know that's not incredibly well formed, but I think because we are thinking about our communities in different ways now, it makes me pull back a little bit and think about what that means in terms of my programming. It's also really important to me to do more co-curating and working with others. So, and for instance, with the vernacular exhibition of African American photographs, because I am not African American or from that community, I can't tell that whole story. So it was really wonderful to partner with individuals in the community to help tell that story. And I'd like to do a lot more work in that way that's more community-based and collaborative. So it's much more, I get so much more out of it, I learn so much more, I think our audiences get more out of it, and it makes for better exhibitions. Yeah. Thank you for your question. I hope that answered some of it.
First, thank you.
Thank you.
And second, how long passed before Ross dug that film back up?
How long had passed? So it's my understanding that he buried around August of 1944. Some people say it was in the fall, and then they were uncovered in March of 1945. So maybe 5 to 8 months, 6 to 8 months or so. So they were buried in, they described them, his wife, Stefania, who was often his lookout when he was photographing secretly, she describes that the negatives were sealed in metal jars. So I'm not exactly sure, I have a general idea of what that means, but metal jars, and then they lined a box with tar. So the inside of the box was lined with tar. But Polish winters are incredibly difficult, of course, so a lot of moisture got in, seeped in, so he lost, well, some of the negatives were still usable, but about half were not usable. So it's just incredible that any of them survived at all. Yeah, yeah.
What's the reluctance to using the term muse?
Oh, it's so gendered. It's so gendered. Women are often the master artist's muse. I appreciate you asking that question too, but I feel like we're done with that. I'm done with that term. I'm done with that term. Yeah. So women. Okay. Yeah. Let's put that term to bed. Thanks for asking. I like
Well,
that.
thanks for your attending tonight. Thanks for your support of this museum. And Julia, thank you.
Thanks, Brian.